Hey there. Welcome to Midnight Sleep Crime. I'm here to help you relax tonight. I know many of you use this video to fall asleep. So, before you get cozy, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel. Also, let me know where you're watching from and what time it is there. I'd love to hear from you. Story 1. In 1998, a 15-year-old girl named Hannah Pierce left her small-town high school in rural Maine and vanished during the short walk home. Her backpack was found in a drainage ditch, her shoes neatly placed beside it, but Hannah herself was gone. What followed was a decades-long mystery involving missing diaries, a teacher with secrets, and a series of anonymous letters that arrived every year on the anniversary of her disappearance. On the afternoon of October 6, 1998, the town of Millhaven, Maine, seemed to move at its usual slow pace. The maples along Parker Street were just beginning to turn into fiery shades of red and gold. The air had that sharp crispness of autumn, and for most people, the day passed without incident. But for one girl, 15-year-old Hannah Pierce, it would become the last day anyone saw her alive. Hannah wasn't extraordinary in the way small towns usually defined it. She wasn't a star athlete or a straight-A student. She wasn't the popular cheerleader type, nor the reclusive loner who drew suspicion. She was, in many ways, the girl most people didn't notice until she was gone. Quiet, soft-spoken, always polite. She blended into the hallways of Millhaven High School, just another face in a sea of plaid jackets and worn-out sneakers. Yet the details of her final walk home, the choices she made, the route she took, and the unsettling clues she left behind, would haunt the town for decades. A normal day. That Tuesday began unremarkably. Hannah woke up in the two-bedroom house she shared with her mother, Karen Pierce, and her younger brother, Eli, who was 10. Karen worked nights as a nurse at the local hospital, and by morning she was often exhausted. Hannah had developed a quiet sense of independence, handling her own routine, often even making Eli's breakfast before school. Classmates remembered Hannah as looking a little distracted that morning. She wore her usual light blue jacket, the one her aunt had given her for Christmas, and carried her worn canvas backpack decorated with doodles she'd drawn in permanent marker. Her friend Megan Clark sat with her at lunch that day and later told police that Hannah seemed off. She was quieter than normal, Megan recalled in her interview. She just kept staring out the cafeteria window. I asked if she was okay, and she said she didn't sleep well. That was it. It wasn't a red flag at the time. Teenagers had moods, friends didn't overanalyze them. By 2:45 p.m., the final bell rang, and students spilled into the hallways. Hannah slung her backpack over her shoulder and began her familiar 15-minute walk home. Millhaven was the kind of place where parents didn't worry about their children walking alone. The town was small, the community tight-knit, and violent crime was almost unheard of. Hannah's house was only about a mile from the school. She usually cut across Parker Street, past the old Baptist church, and took a shortcut through Harper's Field, a wide grassy lot bordered by woods. That field was both loved and feared by local kids. In the daytime, it was a place for pickup soccer games and sledding in winter. But once the sun dipped, the dense tree line that bordered it gave off an eerie feeling. Whispers of "don't go in there" lingered among younger kids, fueled by ghost stories and the occasional teenage dare. Still, for Hannah, it was the fastest way home. Several classmates saw her leave the school grounds. A group of older boys recalled her walking alone down Parker Street, her backpack hanging low. One of them said she waved briefly when Megan called out goodbye. The last confirmed sighting of Hannah came from Mr. Thomas Laird, a retired postman who lived near the corner of Parker and Willow. He told investigators he saw Hannah crossing by the church around 3:10 p.m. She nodded politely when he waved, then continued toward Harper's Field. After that, Hannah Pierce seemed to simply vanish. At 5:47 p.m., a call came into the Millhaven Police Department from a jogger named Kelly Grant. She had been running along the edge of Harper's Field when she noticed something strange in the drainage ditch that ran parallel to the road. It was Hannah's backpack. Inside were her school books, a binder with homework assignments, and a half-eaten apple in a plastic bag. Everything appeared untouched, as though it had been gently placed there rather than tossed. But what disturbed investigators even more were the items lying just a few feet away. Hannah's shoes. A pair of worn white sneakers with blue stripes, set neatly side by side in the grass. That detail baffled everyone. Why would a teenage girl voluntarily remove her shoes in the middle of her walk home? Why leave them in such an orderly manner? Theories ranged from Hannah being lured into a car to something far darker, but no explanation fully fit the scene. The first hours. When Hannah didn't arrive home by 4:30 p.m., her younger brother Eli grew worried. Their mother, Karen, had just woken from a post-shift nap and assumed Hannah had gone to Megan's. She called Megan's house, only to learn Hannah had never shown up there. By 6:15 p.m., Karen Pierce was on the phone with police, her voice trembling. "My daughter didn't come home from school. She always comes straight home. This isn't like her." Within the hour, local officers were canvassing Harper's Field. Flashlights cut through the dusk as searchers spread out in lines, calling Hannah's name into the growing dark. Dogs were brought in but picked up only a faint trail that ended abruptly near the dish. By nightfall, the small town was buzzing. Parents called one another, neighbors checked sheds and garages, and rumors began to swirl. Some whispered about strangers seen in town that week. Others remembered old stories about the woods at the edge of the field, tales of voices at night, and shadows moving. For Karen Pierce, none of those explanations mattered. All she knew was that her daughter hadn't come home, and her shoes were lying in the grass like an unspoken message. The teacher. Among those questioned early was Mr. David Mercer, a 34-year-old English teacher at Mill Haven High. Mercer had taught Hannah's freshman literature class and was known for being charismatic, if somewhat intense. According to Megan Clark, Hannah had recently confided that she didn't like the way Mr. Mercer looked at her. At the time, Megan had brushed it off as typical teenage complaints about a strict teacher. But after Hannah disappeared, that comment resurfaced with chilling weight. Police interviewed Mercer on October 7th. He claimed he had stayed late grading papers and left school only around 4:30 p.m. No one could verify his exact whereabouts between the end of classes and then. When asked if he had spoken to Hannah that day, Mercer hesitated before admitting that he had stopped her in the hallway to remind her about an overdue essay. He described the encounter as brief, nothing out of the ordinary. Though there was no evidence linking him directly to the disappearance, Mercer's vague answers and the way he nervously tugged at his collar during questioning made investigators uneasy. The first night search. By midnight, Harper's Field had become a sea of headlights, flashlights, and anxious voices. Dozens of volunteers combed through the grass, the drainage ditch, and even the wooded border. They found no signs of a struggle, no torn clothing, no blood. Just silence, broken only by the crunch of boots and the occasional call of Hannah's name. Some searchers claimed they heard something strange in the woods that night, faint crying, or perhaps just the wind moving through the branches. Others reported the unsettling feeling of being watched. By 2 a.m., police made the decision to suspend the search until morning. Karen Pierce refused to leave, standing near the ditch where the backpack had been found. She kept repeating the same words over and over. She wouldn't just leave. Hannah wouldn't just leave. The media descends. By the next morning, the story had spread beyond Mill Haven. Local TV crews arrived, filming shots of the field, the ditch, and the worried townspeople. Hannah's school photo, her light brown hair parted neatly, a shy half-smile on her face, was broadcast across Maine. The case touched a nerve. Small towns prided themselves on safety, on knowing everyone, on locking their doors only out of habit rather than necessity. If a girl could vanish in Mill Haven, it could happen anywhere. Reporters pressed police for leads. Was this an abduction? Had Hannah run away? Did the neatly placed shoes suggest a staged scene? Authorities urged patience, but behind closed doors, the tone was grim. Detective Alan Brooks, assigned to lead the case, confided to a colleague that something about the scene felt too deliberate. "It looks like someone wanted us to see those shoes," he said quietly. "Like they were leaving us a message." The town on edge. In the days following Hannah's disappearance, Mill Haven shifted from anxious to fearful. Parents no longer allowed their children to walk alone. The school instituted stricter dismissal procedures. Neighborhood watch groups patrolled at night. Rumors intensified. Some swore they had seen a blue pickup truck parked near the field that afternoon. Others whispered about a drifter who had been spotted in town weeks before. And then there were the darker theories, the ones that pointed fingers inward, toward people everyone thought they knew. Hannah's classmates began to recall small details, things that seemed meaningless before but sinister now. Megan remembered Hannah once saying she sometimes felt like she was being followed on her way home. Another student claimed Hannah had started carrying a small notebook with her, writing in it during lunch, but no one had seen it since she disappeared. That notebook would become central to the case later, but at this early stage, it was just another fragment of a puzzle no one could solve. By the end of that first week, despite search parties, interviews, and even divers sent into the nearby river, no trace of Hannah had been found. The image of her shoes in the grass lingered like a scar. Her mother clung to the hope that Hannah was alive, somewhere, waiting to be found. But in Millhaven, people began locking their doors, glancing over their shoulders, and whispering Hannah's name like a ghost story already forming. What no one knew yet was that Hannah's disappearance would not be a single tragedy, but the beginning of a chain of events that would unravel secrets the town had buried for years. And before long, the mystery would grow darker. Letters would arrive, another girl would vanish, and a community that thought it was safe would learn just how much danger had been hiding in plain sight. Because Hannah Pierce's walk home wasn't just the end of her day. It was the end of Millhaven's innocence. The last confirmed sighting of Emily Carter was the kind of ordinary moment that, in hindsight, becomes agonizing. On Friday, November 13, 2009, the 15-year-old left the school library at 4:37 p.m., her dark blue hoodie zipped against the cold drizzle. Her phone battery was at 9%, though she didn't seem worried. She told her best friend, Maya Lopez, that she'd charge it once she got home. She waved, laughed at something Maya said, and walked toward the side gate that led to the shortcut path she always took. She was expected home by 5:15 p.m. Her mother had made spaghetti and garlic bread, Emily's favorite. But 5:15 came and went. By 6 o'clock, dinner sat untouched on the table. By 6:45, her mother, Rachel Carter, was calling Maya, the school, and anyone she could think of. By 7 o'clock, Rachel was on the phone with the police. That's how quickly ordinary time stopped. The first few hours. At first, the responding officer told Rachel it was probably nothing. Teenagers, he explained, often ran late or stopped at a friend's house. Maybe she forgot to call. Maybe she turned her phone off. But Rachel knew her daughter. Emily wasn't the kind of girl who wandered without notice. She had routines. She had a curfew. And she was the kind of kid who, even when she broke a rule, left a note about it. By 8:30 p.m., Rachel was pacing the living room, her hands trembling, dialing Emily's phone again and again. Each time, the call went straight to voicemail. "Hi, it's Emily. Leave a message." By 9 o'clock, Rachel was driving up and down the streets between the school and their home, her headlights sweeping over rain-slick pavement, hoping to spot that blue hoodie. By 10 o'clock, 2 squad cars were canvassing the area. The shortcut path. The path Emily had taken countless times before was less than half a mile. Locals called it Willow Creek Path, though there was no creek, just a narrow stretch of cracked pavement that cut through a row of vacant lots and a chain of abandoned buildings. In the late afternoon, it wasn't considered particularly unsafe. Teenagers used it all the time. But at night, it turned into something different. Shadowed, silent, with a hum of distant traffic muffled by the walls of derelict houses. When police first walked the path that night, they didn't see anything obvious. No torn clothing. No dropped bag. No signs of a struggle. But there was something strange. A single white sneaker, soaked from the rain, resting just off the pavement in the weeds. Rachel identified it immediately. It was Emily's. Building a timeline, detectives began piecing together the last movements of Emily Carter. 4:37 p.m., leaves school library. Seen by Maya and 2 other students. 4:42 p.m., surveillance camera from a corner store shows Emily walking past, hood up, holding her phone in her left hand. 4:49 p.m., elderly neighbor Mrs. Dalton sees her on Willow Creek Path, about halfway home. She waves, but Emily doesn't seem to notice. 4:51 p.m., Emily's phone pings a cell tower less than 200 yards from where the path exits onto Maplewood Street. This is the last activity recorded on her phone before it dies. And then, nothing. The community joins in. By Saturday morning, the search had swelled. Volunteers, neighbors, classmates, even teachers gathered at the Carter house to help distribute flyers. A photo of Emily, smiling at last year's fall carnival, freckles showing under the sunlight, was plastered across telephone poles, bus stops, and shop windows. The town of Rosefield wasn't used to this kind of fear. Parents who usually let their kids walk freely to the park now drove them everywhere. People kept porch lights on all night. The empty houses along Willow Creek Path became places of whispered suspicion. Reporters arrived by Sunday, their cameras rolling as they asked Rachel how she was holding up. She tried to speak, but her voice broke. "My daughter doesn't just disappear," she said, clutching Emily's school photo to her chest. Theories begin. Within 72 hours, detectives were weighing possibilities. Runaway? Could Emily have left willingly? Some investigators leaned on this theory early on. But her close friends insisted she had no reason to. No fights at home. No secret boyfriend. No money missing from her room. Abduction by a stranger. The shortcut path, isolated and poorly lit, was the perfect opportunity for someone to grab her. But why leave no trace other than a single shoe? Someone she knew, detectives quietly considered whether someone in Emily's circle might have lured her. These cases often pointed closer to home than strangers. The white car. One of the first breaks came from a man named Paul Henderson, who lived on Maplewood Street, where the path emptied out. He told police that around 5 p.m., he saw a white four-door sedan idling near the mouth of the path. He couldn't make out the driver, only that the engine was running and the headlights were off. When asked if he saw Emily, he hesitated. I thought I saw a figure. Maybe a girl. But it was quick. And then the car pulled away. His account was frustratingly vague. Still, detectives began combing through traffic cameras, hoping to catch a glimpse of that white sedan. Rachel's desperation. Rachel Carter barely slept in those first days. She sat in Emily's room, inhaling the faint scent of her daughter's strawberry shampoo on the pillow, staring at the rows of books on the shelves. Every time the phone rang, her heart leapt. She held press conferences. She begged whoever might have her daughter to bring her home. She replayed every memory of that Friday, wondering if she missed something, some sign Emily had been hiding. But there was nothing. Just the unbearable silence of an empty room. A shift in the case. By the end of the first week, the investigation had expanded. Search dogs were brought to Willow Creek Path. At one point, they alerted near an abandoned house that had once been a small repair shop. Inside, police found broken bottles, old mattresses, and graffiti, but no Emily. Still, one chilling detail lingered. According to a volunteer, the dogs reacted strongest near the basement door. Detectives made a note, though officially they said nothing was found. It was around this time that Maya, Emily's best friend, admitted something she hadn't told police before. Emily was worried about someone, Maya whispered. She didn't say who. Just that she felt like she was being followed. She told me that last week. When detectives pressed her, Maya said Emily thought she'd seen the same white car near the school a few times. She had laughed it off as paranoia, but now, it seemed impossible to ignore. The candlelight vigil. On the 2-week mark, the town gathered outside the school. Hundreds of candles flickered against the November wind. Teachers wept openly. Friends held hands and released blue balloons into the sky, Emily's favorite color. Rachel spoke only 2 sentences. "My daughter is out there. Please don't stop looking." Her voice cracked so deeply it haunted everyone who heard it. A lead that changes everything. Just days later, police reviewed surveillance footage from a gas station less than a mile from Willow Creek Path. At 5:08 p.m., 17 minutes after Emily was last seen, a white sedan pulled into the lot. The driver wore a baseball cap pulled low, face partially obscured. But what made investigators' stomachs drop was the shape in the passenger seat. A small figure, hood pulled up, head leaning against the window. The timestamp was unmistakable. It was minutes after Emily vanished. And just like that, The case shifted from a missing person investigation into a suspected abduction. The disappearance of Emily Carter was no longer a mystery of where did she go, but who took her and why? The town of Rosefield would never be the same again. The town of Marlow had long been used to the ordinary rhythms of life. School bells ringing in the morning, the corner store closing at 9, and the steady hum of traffic along Route 7. But since the night of Emily Carter's disappearance, every sound seemed sharper, every face in town more suspicious, every car that drove past a potential threat. It was Detective Laura Jensen who first noticed the car. She had been reviewing the CCTV footage from nearby businesses the morning after Emily vanished. The footage was grainy, cheap security cameras mounted on storefronts that did more to catch shadows than faces, but one detail kept surfacing: a white sedan. On 3 different cameras along Emily's usual walking route, the same car appeared. Its headlights glowed like twin watchful eyes in the dim streetlight, its paint scratched along the passenger side. The timestamp showed the vehicle circling the block, doubling back in slow, predatory loops. Laura paused the footage, leaning closer. She replayed the clip again and again, watching as the car shadowed the sidewalk where Emily had walked only minutes before she disappeared. "It's not a coincidence," Laura muttered under her breath. The town's whisper. Word spread quickly. Within 2 days, the white sedan became more than just a car. It became the town's obsession. People whispered about it in grocery store aisles, in church pews, and across school parking lots. "I saw a white car parked by the woods last week," a woman told officers at the sheriff's department. "There's a guy with a white Buick who's always hanging around the high school," another reported. Soon, dozens of calls were flooding the tip line. Every white car in Marlow became suspect. Parents walked their children to school instead of letting them ride bikes. Teenagers, once carefree, now traveled in pairs, casting nervous glances whenever headlights appeared behind them at night. Emily's mother, Claire, barely slept. From her living room window, she watched passing cars, flinching whenever she saw one painted white. Her grief mixed with anger, because if someone had been watching Emily, if someone had been stalking her, maybe the community should have noticed sooner. The witness. 3 nights after Emily vanished, a witness came forward. His name was Paul Martinez, a janitor at the high school. He told police he had been walking home late from his shift, cutting across the field near Maple Street, when he saw something unusual. "There was this car," Paul recalled nervously in the interview room. "White 4-door. Parked at the curb with the engine running. I thought it was odd. It was past 11, and the street was empty. Then I saw a girl." Detective Laura leaned forward. "What girl?" Paul shifted, his eyes troubled. "I swear it looked like Emily. Blonde hair, the She was standing on the sidewalk, talking to whoever was inside. I couldn't hear what was being said, but she didn't look scared. More like confused." "Did you see the driver?" Paul hesitated, frustration etched across his face. "No. It was too dark. The street light was busted on that corner. All I saw was a shape in the driver's seat. Could have been a man. Could have been a woman. But I'll never forget that car." He scratched at the table nervously. After a minute, the passenger door opened. She got in. Then they drove off. Laura's pen froze above her notepad. Paul's statement was the most significant lead they had so far. The patterns. Detectives began pulling traffic and surveillance records. Within 48 hours, they identified at least 5 vehicles in town that matched the description of a white sedan with passenger side damage. Each owner was questioned. One belonged to a retired couple who rarely drove after dark. Another was registered to a college student who claimed he had been at his girlfriend's house the entire night. One car, a dented Chevrolet Malibu, was owned by a man named Richard Hale, a construction worker with a reputation for drinking too much and picking fights. Richard quickly became a person of interest. When interviewed, he was defensive, claiming his car's damage came from a fender bender weeks earlier. But his alibi was shaky. He said he had been home alone the night Emily vanished. No one could confirm it. Detectives impounded the Malibu for forensic testing, searching for fibers, fingerprints, or any trace of Emily. But as the days turned into weeks, nothing definitive surfaced. The white sedan returns. Then came the second sighting. On a cold Friday evening, nearly 3 weeks after Emily's disappearance, a high school senior named Megan Turner was walking home from her part-time job at the diner. The streets were quiet, her breath forming white clouds in the crisp air. She noticed it immediately, a car creeping behind her, headlights dimmed, keeping pace with her footsteps. Megan's stomach tightened. The vehicle was white. She quickened her pace, clutching her phone, her heart hammering. The car inched closer, rolling silently along the curb. Finally, it pulled ahead of her and stopped. The passenger window slid down with a mechanical whine. "Need a ride?" a man's voice called out. Megan's instincts screamed at her. She didn't answer. Instead, she bolted toward a nearby gas station, shoving open the glass door and nearly colliding with the cashier. By the time police arrived, the car was gone. But Megan remembered one crucial detail. The license plate had been partially obscured with mud, but the first 3 letters were extra. The connection. Detectives ran the partial plate against state records. It narrowed the search significantly. Only 4 registered vehicles in the region matched a white sedan with plates beginning in XJR. One of those cars belonged to Richard Hale. When confronted with the new evidence, Richard grew furious. He slammed his fists on the table, shouting that he was being harassed, that he had nothing to do with Emily. But his anger only deepened suspicion. Detectives obtained a warrant to search his home. Inside, they found alcohol bottles scattered across the floor, unpaid bills, and an unmade bed. But nothing that directly tied him to Emily. No clothing, no belongings, no signs of struggle. The only detail that kept him in their sights was the car, and the gnawing feeling that Emily had been seen getting into one just like it. The family's hope. Claire Carter clung to the hope that Emily was still alive. The image of her daughter willingly entering that car haunted her. To Claire, it meant Emily hadn't been dragged away kicking and screaming. Maybe, just maybe, she had known the driver. Maybe it was someone she trusted. Claire replayed conversations in her mind, searching for names Emily had mentioned. Teachers, neighbors, boys from school. She began to wonder if the abductor was not a stranger at all, but someone hiding in plain sight, someone who had slowly earned Emily's trust before luring her into the car that night. The break in the case. Weeks later, another clue surfaced. A highway patrol officer, reviewing dashcam footage from the night Emily vanished, noticed something odd. At 11:47 p.m., a white sedan was recorded driving northbound on Route 12, just 15 minutes after Paul Martinez had seen Emily getting into a similar car. The sedan's license plate was visible. It wasn't Richard Hale's. It belonged to a different man entirely. A man who lived just outside of Marlow. A man with no prior record. A man whose name had not come up once in the investigation. His name was Daniel Whitaker. The moment Detective Laura saw the name, a chill ran down her spine. Because Daniel wasn't just anyone. He was a quiet man who lived alone, who worked odd hours, and who, according to town gossip, had been seen driving near the high school more than once. And suddenly, all eyes turned to him. Because if Emily really had gotten into the car willingly, maybe she had recognized Daniel. And maybe that was exactly why she never came home. The neighborhood of Briar Lane was quiet in a way that made your stomach twist. The rows of old houses, their paint peeling and fences sagging, looked like relics from another time. At night, the street lamps flickered with a tired, yellowish glow, as if even the electricity was reluctant to linger there. Locals didn't walk down Briar Lane if they could help it, not after dark, not since the whispers about the white sedan began to spread. Detective Marlowe had been on the force for 20 years, long enough to recognize the thin line between rumor and evidence. But something about Briar Lane, and about the house that stood at its end, was different. The night he first parked his cruiser at the curb, staring at the property in question, he couldn't help but feel a strange, pressing heaviness. It was a 2-story structure with faded blue shutters and a roof patched in uneven tiles. The lawn had gone wild with weeds, and the driveway was cracked, as though no car had rested there in decades. But the most unsettling thing was the window on the second floor. Its curtains were always drawn, but neighbors swore they sometimes saw a shadow move across them late at night. A tall, thin figure that didn't belong. The house had been linked to the case of Emily Carter, the 17-year-old who vanished without a trace after leaving her friend's birthday party. Witnesses had described seeing a white sedan tailing her on her walk home. Weeks later, a vehicle matching that description was spotted parked at the side of Briar Lane. By the time officers arrived, it was gone. Still, something tied this house to Emily. A knock at the door. Detective Marlowe approached cautiously, his flashlight beam cutting across the broken porch steps. He raised his fist and knocked on the door. The hollow sound echoed into the quiet night, unnaturally loud. No answer. He knocked again, this time harder. Still silence. He tried the doorknob, but Marlowe leaned down, examining the chipped paint around the knob, where faint scratches ran in uneven circles. Someone had picked this lock before. Recently. Detective Marlowe? A voice whispered behind him. He turned to see a woman in her 50s standing near the curb, clutching her coat around her shoulders. Her face was pale, her eyes darting nervously toward the house. "You shouldn't be here," she said. "And why is that?" Marlowe asked, stepping closer. "Because the last person who went in there never came out." Marlowe studied her carefully. "Who was that?" She hesitated. "A boy from the neighborhood. Dared by his friends to go inside. We never saw him again. But the window," she gestured at the upstairs window, "that night, we saw the curtain move." Before Marlowe could press further, she shook her head violently, muttered something about curses, and hurried off into the night, her footsteps fading. Inside the blue house, the detective radioed dispatch for backup, but no one was immediately available. Reluctantly, he decided to take a look on his own. He circled to the back and found a window half open, as though inviting him in. He slipped inside. The air was thick, carrying a damp, rotten smell that made him gag. The interior was worse than the outside suggested. Floors warped with water damage, wallpaper peeling in long strips, furniture draped in dust. Yet, despite the neglect, he noticed something odd. There were fresh footprints in the dust. Marlowe crouched down, shining his light across the floor. They were shoe prints, leading from the back window to the hallway. Someone had been here recently. Maybe still was. The beam of his flashlight landed on a wall at the end of the hall, where a series of photographs had been tacked up in no particular order. His heart tightened. They were of Emily Carter. Some looked like they'd been taken secretly, from a distance, Emily walking home from school, sitting at the diner with friends, even leaving the library with books in her arms. In one photo, she was staring straight at the camera, her expression caught mid-blink. Marlowe swallowed hard, his fingers tightening around the flashlight. The second floor. He followed the creaking stairs upward, each step groaning beneath his weight. The smell was worse here, sharper. At the top of the landing, he froze. The door to the room with the drawn curtains was ajar. From within came a faint sound, something between a whisper and a shuffle. Marlowe steadied his breathing, his other hand resting on his holstered gun. He pushed the door open slowly. The room was empty, or at least it seemed so. The walls were lined with more photographs, but not just of Emily. There were pictures of other young women too, pinned up in overlapping layers like some grotesque collage. Some of the photos were so old they had yellowed around the edges. Others looked freshly printed. In the corner of the room was a chair, and on the chair sat a single object, a small, black flip phone. Marlowe stepped closer. The phone vibrated suddenly, startling him. Its screen lit up with a message. "She's still here." The detective spun around, his flashlight darting across the room. Nothing. The basement door. As he searched the upstairs, he noticed a trapdoor in the hallway floor, leading down into the basement. A heavy lock had once secured it, but the metal was broken, as if forced open. Every instinct in Marlowe's body told him not to go down there, but every bone in his duty said otherwise. He pried the door open, the hinges screaming. A cold draft rushed up from the darkness below. He descended. The basement smelled of rust and mold, the kind of damp air that clung to your lungs. His light flickered over the concrete floor, revealing markings scratched into the surface. Circles. Numbers. Strange symbols that didn't look like graffiti, they looked deliberate. Ritualistic. And then he saw the chair. It sat in the middle of the room, bolted to the floor. Straps hung loosely from the armrests, stained dark. Around it, piles of clothing were scattered, women's jackets, scarves, and shoes. Among them, he spotted a familiar red scarf. Emily's. Footsteps. Marlowe's breath caught. He reached for his radio, but before he could speak into it, he heard it. Footsteps. Above him. Slow, deliberate, crossing the living room floor. He froze, holding his breath, his hand instinctively going to his weapon. The steps grew louder, heavier, pacing back and forth. Whoever it was hadn't left. They had been waiting. Then the sound stopped. For several minutes, there was silence. Marlowe strained his ears. Nothing. Finally, he climbed the stairs cautiously, gun drawn. The house was empty. Or at least, it looked empty. The front door was wide open now, swinging lightly on its hinges. Whoever had been there was gone. A chilling discovery. Backup finally arrived 20 minutes later, and Marlowe led them through the house. They documented everything: the photographs, the phone, the basement chair. But when they searched for the red scarf, it had vanished. So had the phone. All that remained was the chair and the scratched symbols. The neighbors gathered outside, whispering as officers moved in and out of the property. Some swore they had seen the curtain shift in the upstairs window again, though no one had entered that room. Others pointed out that Briar Lane had a reputation long before Emily's disappearance, that children were warned not to play near the Blue House for decades. The official report would list it as evidence connected to ongoing investigation, but in the quiet conversations around town, the story twisted into something darker. The house wasn't just a place of interest, it was alive, watching, feeding on those who stepped inside. The road ahead. For Detective Marlowe, the visit to the house on Briar Lane changed everything. He was no longer chasing just a missing persons case. He was chasing a predator who had hidden in plain sight for years, maybe longer. The photographs suggested Emily wasn't the first. The clothing in the basement hinted at more victims, nameless and forgotten. And the phone message, "She's still here," haunted him in ways he couldn't explain. If Emily was alive, she might still be inside that house somewhere. But where? Marlowe swore to himself he would find out. But as he drove away from Briar Lane that night, he couldn't shake the feeling that the house wasn't done with him either. That in its walls, behind its drawn curtains, something was still watching. Waiting. And it wasn't finished. The search for 17-year-old Lena Walker had stretched into its fifth agonizing day, and the community of Ridgeway was suffocating under the weight of uncertainty. Flyers fluttered from telephone poles and storefronts, Lena's face staring back with wide, hopeful eyes. Volunteers combed through neighborhoods, riversides, and farmlands, their voices growing hoarse from calling her name. But the deeper the search went, the more it seemed the ground itself had swallowed her whole. It wasn't until the fifth evening that a call came in from an older couple who lived on the outskirts of Ridgeway. They reported something odd: strange cars parked intermittently near the trailhead of the Whispering Woods, a sprawling patch of forest infamous for its unsettling reputation. The woods weren't marked on tourist maps, and locals rarely went there unless they had to. They said it had been cursed since long before Ridgeway was even a town, a place where sounds carried in ways they shouldn't and where people often spoke of whispers threading through the trees. The police initially dismissed it as folklore. But with leads dwindling, Detective Sarah Connors decided it was worth a look. Into the trees. On the sixth morning, dozens of volunteers, along with Ridgeway police, gathered at the Whispering Woods trailhead. Mist clung to the ground like a veil, twisting around their ankles as though trying to pull them back. The air was damp and cold despite the summer month. Detective Connors stood at the front, her face pale in the weak light. "Listen up," she called, her voice sharp but tight with exhaustion. "We'll be working in grid formations. If you see anything, even if you're not sure what it is, you mark it and call it in. This is no place to wander off. Stay with your groups." The volunteers nodded, clutching their flashlights even though the morning was young. Parents kept a protective hold on their children's shoulders, as though the woods might reach out and snatch them too. The search began. Whispers on the wind. It didn't take long before the unease set in. The Whispering Woods weren't like any other forest. The trees grew unnaturally close together, their canopies stitching into a thick ceiling that let in little light. Even with dozens of searchers scattered throughout, the woods seemed to smother sound. Voices became muffled, swallowed by the density of bark and leaves. And then came the whispers. At first, people thought it was the wind, a low hiss, threading between branches. But the longer they stayed, the more it seemed like words, indistinct, quick, like a conversation just out of reach. "I swear I heard someone call my name," one volunteer whispered to another, clutching her jacket tighter. "You didn't," the other replied, but his tone carried no conviction. Detective Connors herself paused more than once, her breath hitching as the faint sound of a girl's laugh, or was it a cry, slipped through the trees. She shook it off, but deep down, dread was crawling its way up her throat. A trail of clues. Around midday, a sharp call cut through the air. "Over here. We've found something." The searchers converged. Beneath a sycamore tree lay a small, tattered canvas shoe, coated in mud but unmistakably the type Lena often wore. The tread matched the one described by her mother, a distinctive flower pattern. The forest seemed to tighten around them. Detective Connors knelt by the shoe, bagging it carefully. "She was here," she muttered, scanning the trees. "She came through here." Not long after, a few yards deeper, another clue appeared, a strand of blue fabric, torn and snagged on a branch. It matched the color of Lena's denim jacket. The air thickened with urgency. Whatever had happened, whatever had pulled Lena into these cursed woods, the trail was fresh. The old cabin. By late afternoon, the search led them to a clearing few had ever seen. There, hunched and rotting beneath the canopy, stood a small cabin. Its roof sagged, the wood blackened with mold, and the windows gaped like empty sockets. Whispers rippled through the group. "That wasn't on the maps. Did anyone even know this was here? It looks abandoned." But Detective Connors felt her chest tighten. She had seen enough cases to know cabins hidden deep in cursed woods rarely meant anything good. They approached cautiously. The door creaked as Connors pushed it open, the smell of mildew and rot hitting her like a punch. Inside, the cabin was sparse. A broken table, a rusted lantern, a filthy mattress in the corner. But it wasn't the decay that sent shivers through her, it was what lay on the floor. A notebook. Its cover was black, its edges frayed. The searchers crowded in, watching as Connors flipped it open with gloved hands. Inside were scrawled pages of notes, names, and dates. At least half a dozen were girls from surrounding counties, many of them listed as missing persons. The room went silent, and at the bottom of the last page, written in uneven letters, was Lena's name. The darkness between. That night, the Whispering Woods weren't empty. Police cars lined the dirt road, their red and blue lights staining the mist. Forensics teams combed the cabin, every inch bagged and tagged, while searchers were pulled back for their safety. But even with the cabin secured, Lena was still nowhere to be found. The whispers in the forest grew louder. Some swore they heard crying echoing through the branches. Others said they heard a man's voice, low and commanding. Whether it was imagination or something else, no one could agree. But the fear was unanimous. Detective Connors remained at the site long after the others were sent home. She stood in the doorway of that rotten cabin, staring at the black notebook. Something about it felt wrong. Not just because of what it contained, but because it seemed unfinished. Lena's name was written there, yes, but no date followed it. It was as if whoever had written it was still waiting, still watching. An ominous revelation. The following morning, a chilling report came in. A hunter, passing near the woods days before Lena vanished, had seen a white sedan parked at the trailhead. The same white sedan multiple witnesses claimed they had seen stalking Ridgeway in the weeks before Lena's disappearance. Detective Connors' blood ran cold. The woods weren't just cursed. They weren't just haunted by whispers. Someone had been using them. The search intensifies. Armed with this revelation, Connors doubled the manpower in the Whispering Woods. Cadaver dogs were brought in, though they struggled to pick up a clean scent in the thick underbrush. Drones hovered overhead, though the canopy made their work near useless. Still, the search pressed on. For hours, they found nothing but silence and shadows. But just before dusk, one of the dogs began to bark furiously near a cluster of pines. The ground beneath was disturbed, dirt recently turned. The team dug. But what they unearthed wasn't Lena. It was a box. Inside, wrapped in decaying fabric, were belongings. A silver locket, a child's ribbon, an old photograph of another missing girl. Trophies. The woods, it seemed, had been a dumping ground for years. And the whispers? They were the echoes of stories too many had tried to forget. The question that remains. As darkness fell and the search was called for the night, Detective Connors stood at the tree line, staring into the endless black of the whispering woods. Lena was still out there. The clues were leading them deeper and deeper into a place that seemed alive with secrets. But one question gnawed at Connors relentlessly. Were they chasing a killer through the woods? Or were the woods themselves keeping Lena? The whispers seemed to answer, rustling through the leaves like a taunt. Come find me. And Connors knew they weren't even close to the end. The woods along Briar Lane had always been thick, shadowy, and unsettling even in daylight. To most residents of the town, they were simply a boundary, a patch of untamed wilderness separating the suburban sprawl from the older farmland further out. But in the months following Emily Carter's disappearance, those woods took on an entirely different reputation. Parents warned their children not to play too close. Joggers avoided their trails. And by the fall of 1999, the Whispering Woods had become the most whispered about place in town. Detective Laura Keene had driven past them countless times since Emily's disappearance. Every time, she slowed slightly, scanning the rows of dark pines and tangled undergrowth, searching for something, anything, that might break the silence. But the woods kept their secrets well. Until one day they didn't. A new witness. It began with a phone call. On October 22nd, a man named Calvin Price called the station. He sounded nervous, almost embarrassed, as he explained that he often went hunting in the woods just beyond Briar Lane. For years, he had treated them as his private escape. But that morning, while scouting for deer trails, he'd noticed something unusual, broken branches higher up in the trees, as though someone had been climbing them. That's not the strange part, he told Keene over the phone. The strange part is, I swear I saw someone up there, watching me. At first, Keene assumed Calvin was mistaken. Maybe it had been a vagrant or a trick of light. But his voice carried a conviction that unsettled her. He was tall, skinny. I didn't see his face, but he was crouched between the branches, still as anything. Like he was waiting. Keene didn't dismiss it. The woods had already tied themselves to Emily's case. Kids swore they heard voices. Neighbors reported seeing unfamiliar cars parked nearby. If there truly was a man lurking in the trees, it could be the break they needed. Into the woods. That evening, Keene gathered 2 other officers and returned with Calvin to the spot. The air was cold and damp, the smell of pine thick around them. Calvin led them to a clearing where the forest floor dipped into a shallow ravine. There, he whispered, pointing upward. At first, all they saw were leaves shifting in the wind. But then Keene's flashlight caught something unnatural. Wedged into the crook of a branch was a rope, frayed and looped in a way that suggested someone had been using it to climb. Someone's been living here, one officer muttered. Closer inspection revealed more. A scattering of cigarette butts in the soil, a crushed soda can, and a strange scrap of cloth snagged on bark. It wasn't camping gear, nothing that suggested someone was merely passing through. Whoever had been in those trees wasn't hiding from society, they were watching it. Keene shivered. The angle of the branches looked directly toward the path where Emily Carter would have walked the night she disappeared. The silent observer. Over the following week, surveillance teams were stationed in the woods. They concealed themselves in the brush, waiting for the so-called man in the trees to return. For nights, nothing happened. But then, on October 29th, Officer David Morales reported movement. I saw him, Morales later testified. He was there about 15 feet up, crouched like some kind of animal. He didn't move when I aimed my flashlight, but the light caught his eyes. They glowed back at me. And then, he was gone. Gone. The man had vanished so swiftly that Morales couldn't explain how he descended without making a sound. No footprints were left in the soft earth below. It was as if the trees had swallowed him. The newspapers loved the story. Headlines read, Phantom watcher in the woods. Connection to missing girl? The town grew more restless, curfews were tightened, and Briar Lane became almost deserted after dark. But Keen wasn't satisfied with ghost stories. She wanted proof. A chilling discovery. On November 2nd, Keen returned alone to the woods. She wasn't supposed to. Protocol required backup, but something gnawed at her. She walked the trail quietly, following the line of trees where Emily had likely passed. Her flashlight beam wavered across the bark, searching for signs. And then she saw it. Carved deep into the trunk of an oak was a name, Emily. The letters were jagged, uneven, and fresh. Her breath caught. She reached out and touched the grooves, the bark still raw. Someone had been here recently. Just below the carving lay something half buried in the dirt. Keen knelt, brushing away leaves until her gloved fingers closed around it. When she lifted it into the light, her stomach dropped. It was a shoelace, frayed at one end. Emily's favorite sneakers, the ones her mother had described the night she vanished, had pink laces. The hunter becomes the hunted. The shoelace was bagged and sent to the lab, where DNA testing confirmed it carried trace amounts of Emily's skin cells. For Keen, the evidence was a breakthrough. But it also carried a terrifying implication. Emily had been here. Not just passing through, but close enough to the man in the trees that some part of her clothing had been ripped away. The woods were no longer just a possibility, they were the crime scene. That night, Keen couldn't sleep. Every time she closed her eyes, she pictured Emily looking up in fear, a figure shifting silently among the branches above. If the man had taken Emily, where had he taken her next? Was she still alive when she entered those woods? The shadow of the trees. In the weeks that followed, sightings multiplied. Neighbors reported glimpsing a pale figure slipping between trees at dusk. A teenage couple swore they saw a man perched on a branch outside their car, watching. And one jogger, terrified, claimed she heard a whisper carried on the wind, "Don't look up." The town was suffocating under fear. And Keen knew, whether it was one man or a monster everyone had conjured out of grief, something was waiting in those woods. Something that had watched Emily Carter's final walk home. And whatever it wasn't done watching. The woods on the edge of Briar Lane had always been a place of whispered warnings. Children were told not to wander too far in, not because of any wild animals, but because the trees seemed to hold secrets. Branches swayed even when there was no wind. Shadows stretched longer than they should. And on certain nights, the woods seemed to breathe. On a gray morning in early November, Detective Claire Harlow walked through those very woods, her boots crunching over damp leaves. The air was thick with rot and the faint metallic tang of rain. She had been called out after a local jogger reported something strange along a narrow deer path that led into the darker part of the forest. It wasn't a body. Not this time. It was something smaller, almost ordinary, but as soon as she saw it, she felt her stomach twist. Lying among the leaves, covered in dirt and water stains, was a cassette tape recorder. Its plastic casing was cracked, one of the buttons jammed, as though it had been dropped, or perhaps thrown. Mud clung to the edges. The jogger, wide-eyed and pale, had sworn he didn't touch it. He only noticed the object because it glinted in the weak sunlight, silver against the brown forest floor. Claire crouched beside it, pulling on gloves. The woods were silent except for the occasional caw of a crow in the distance. She picked up the recorder, careful not to smudge potential prints. A strip of masking tape was affixed to the back, faded but still legible. On it, written in black marker, were the words, "Briar Lane, Tape 1. Her chest tightened. She remembered the rumors. Years ago, when Lily Carmichael vanished, there had been hushed talk of recordings. A neighbor had once mentioned hearing a man's voice at night, as if someone were dictating into a recorder, practicing something. But the police had dismissed it. No evidence had ever surfaced. Until now. Claire stood, holding the device as though it were something living. She glanced deeper into the woods. The trees seemed to watch. And she couldn't help but feel the tape had been left here deliberately, not lost, not forgotten, but planted. The first playback. Back at the station, the evidence team carefully cleaned the recorder, noting the wear and damage. Against all odds, the cassette inside remained intact. A small square label on the tape bore the same scrawled handwriting, Briar Lane, Tape 1. Claire sat in the dim audio room, a pair of headphones resting around her neck. Her partner, Detective Ramirez, leaned against the wall, arms crossed. "You sure you want to do this now?" he asked quietly. Claire's fingers hovered over the play button. "If this has anything to do with Lily, or the others, we can't wait." The room was silent. She pressed play. At first, static hissed through the speakers. Then, faintly, the sound of leaves crunching underfoot. Someone was walking. Heavy, deliberate steps. After a moment, a man's voice spoke, deep and gravelly. "She doesn't know I'm watching." Claire froze. Ramirez straightened. "She walks the same path every night. Same corner. Same blue backpack. Kids think they're invisible." The pause. Breathing. Slow. Measured. "The woods are good. The trees help. They remember." Then came a sound neither detective wanted to hear, soft laughter. Not joyous, but hollow, rehearsed. The tape clicked, then continued. "I'll wait tonight. I'll wait by the old fence. She won't see me until it's too late." Static swallowed the rest. Claire ripped the headphones off, bile rising in her throat. Jesus Christ. Ramirez's face was pale. That's not just someone talking. That's a confession. Claire's hands shook. The date on the tape label suggested it had been made the week Lily disappeared. And if this was tape 1, how many more were out there? The woods give more. The next day, a search team combed the forest around Briar Lane. Officers moved in precise lines, orange tape marking their progress. The cold air bit at their skin, and dogs barked as they tugged against leashes, noses pressed to the ground. Within hours, they found it. A second tape recorder, older, rusted, buried under a thin layer of soil near a hollow tree. The label, Tape 2, Lily. Claire's heart nearly stopped when the technician announced it over the radio. They bagged it, brought it in, and played it. The recording began with silence, then the sound of humming. Dune, childlike, out of place. Then the man's voice returned. "She's smaller than I thought." Quieter. She tried to scream, but the woods swallowed it. Claire's stomach knotted. Ramirez swore under his breath. "She asked me if I was going to take her home. I told her yes. I told her the woods were home now." Then, faintly, something else. A muffled voice. A girl's voice. "Please. I want to go home." Claire ripped the headphones off, her chest tight. The room felt like it was closing in. She couldn't breathe. The tape clicked off. There was no mistaking it. The recordings weren't just stories. They were trophies. Evidence of a predator who had stalked, captured, and tormented his victims. And he wanted someone to find them. The hidden pattern. Over the next week, more recorders appeared. One under a pile of rocks near the stream. Another tucked behind the remains of a rotting log. Each labeled, each containing a new chapter in the man's obsession. Tape 3, The Woods Know. Tape 4, The Silence of Briar Lane. The detectives listened, though every playback felt like a violation of the victims, of the town, of their own sanity. The voice grew more confident with each recording, more taunting. "They'll never find her here. I can hear them calling her name. Flashlights in the dark. But the trees, they hide everything. She cried for her mother. I told her the woods don't care about mothers." Claire sat at her desk long after midnight, the voices echoing in her mind. It was as if the killer were still out there, whispering into her ear, daring her to follow his trail. What haunted her most was not just what he said, but what he didn't say. The tapes stopped abruptly, as though entire sections had been erased. Gaps where something important had been removed. "Why leave these for us?" Ramirez muttered one night, slamming his fist on the table. "Why now? It's been years." Claire stared at the stack of evidence bags. "Because he wants to be remembered. He wants the story told in his own words. A voice from the past." One afternoon, as Claire reviewed the latest recording, a detail caught her attention. In the background, barely audible beneath the man's voice, was the sound of a train horn. Her mind raced. The Briar Lane woods were miles from the tracks. Why would a train be heard? Unless the recording wasn't made there at all. She pulled up old maps. tracing the lines of the town, the railroads, the abandoned depots. One, in particular, stood out, a disused station house on the edge of the county, long boarded up and forgotten. "Ramirez," she said, grabbing her coat. "I think I know where he made these." They drove out as dusk fell, the station house looming like a ghost against the horizon. Windows shattered, graffiti scrawled across brick walls. The faint smell of mildew clung to the air. Inside, the floor was littered with debris, beer cans, broken glass, scraps of fabric. And in the corner, almost hidden under a collapsed beam, Claire spotted it. A pile of empty cassette cases. Some were labeled, some were blank, but all bore the same handwriting.